So Proposition 26, we have Anita Lee presenting this one.
Good evening, everyone. Anita Lee with the Legislative Analyst Office. So following the same as Luke, I'm going to start off with a little bit of background and then walk you through the proposal and then finally the fiscal effects. So the California Constitution and state law limit gambling in California. So for example, state law bans sports betting, roulette, and games with dice like craps, but it does allow for some gambling. So think the state lottery, card rooms, betting on horse racing, as well as tribal casinos. Currently for the tribal casinos, tribes have certain rights under federal law to govern themselves. And so this means that the state's regulation is really limited to what is allowed by federal law, as well as federally approved agreements between the state and the tribe known as a tribal state compact. And that compact really dictates how gambling activities will occur. Our state and local gambling laws are generally enforced in a variety of different ways. Some are by regulatory agencies, or through civil lawsuits. And you also have California DOJ, the district attorneys in counties, and city attorneys that can file criminal cases. This proposition has really kind of two components. One set is related to sports betting or sports wagering, and then there are some other non-sports wagering related components. So related to sports betting, this proposition would allow the state's privately operated racetracks and tribal casinos to offer sports betting. For the racetracks, which will be 4 of them, they would be able to offer betting to people 21 years of age or older and require that they pay the state 10% of sports bets made each day after taking out prize payments. All of these revenues would also be deposited into this new special fund that is created. For tribes that would be offering sports betting, it would depend on the specific terms of the compacts when they're amended to allow for that to happen. And that includes whether or not they would also pay into this new special fund. If they don't pay into that new special fund, at minimum, they would have to pay for the costs of regulation. For all of those monies going into the new special fund, the proposition would require that about kind of 40% of it would first go to support education. Of the remaining 60%, the first call would be to cover state regulatory costs. After paying for the state regulatory costs, the remaining monies would be split in 3 ways. 15% for gambling addiction and mental health programs and grants, 15% for sports betting and gambling enforcement costs, and then 70% to the state's general fund. The key non-sports related sports betting related provisions are that it would allow roulette and games with dice like craps to be offered at tribal casinos if their compacts are amended to allow them to do so. And then it also allows for a new enforcement method to enforce gambling laws. And specifically, it would allow people or entities to file civil lawsuits seeking action under particular conditions. So in terms of the fiscal effects, the size of the fiscal effect will really depend on how this measure is interpreted and implemented. But in terms of thinking about state revenues, we believe that there will be increased state revenues, possibly reaching the tens of millions of dollars annually. For the effect on local government revenues, there could be various effects on local governments. Likely would not be large, but would be stemming in particular, for example, from the new kind of enforcement method to enforce gambling laws. It could mean that certain jurisdictions could bear a greater impact to the extent they get a larger share of their revenue, for example, from card rooms. There would also be increased state costs for state agencies to regulate in-person sports betting that could possibly reach the low tens of millions of dollars annually. And then finally, there would be increased state costs for DOJ and the state courts related to that new enforcement method that's not likely to exceed the low millions of dollars annually. And this is really because they would need to respond to any claims that are sort of filed. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kim and move the presentation on forward.
All right, this will be important because the next one is sort of overlapping, so stay tuned. All right, so this is on the ballot thanks to a coalition of Native American tribes, the major donors, tribes obviously that have gaming. In terms of endorsements from political figures, we have our lieutenant governor who's in support of it and our state treasurer. And in opposition, we have the Republican Party. The Democratic Party did not take a position. As far as organizations, we have 27 different tribes and organizations that have come out in support of this. In addition, we have the smaller subsets of the NAACP, some ministers, a bunch of sort of community groups of various sorts that have come out in favor of this. And then in opposition, it's casinos, right? A bunch of casinos that are not Native American casinos, and a union. And then in terms of newspaper endorsements, it's only opposition, from none in support so far, from the San Jose Mercury News, LA Times, Sacramento Bee. And then the spending, the yes spending is these Native American gambling organizations, and the no spending is mostly other gambling organizations, other casinos. So you can see it's sort of gambling organizations against each other in this case. The supporters have raised more money than the opponents, but there's a lot of money in this one. So you're likely to see some ads on this proposition because there's plenty of cash behind it. All right, what questions do you have on this one? Please put them in the Q&A again, and we'll be happy to try to answer those questions for you. If we don't see people, then we'll move on to the next one, and maybe there will be comparative questions because they are very related to each other. I'll give it another second. Looks like no one's asking questions on this one so far. Again, put them in the Q&A if you have a question. Why are the news outlets opposed? You can look those up. I've got a list of the sources at the end of this presentation where you can look at what those outlets said. But we're being nonpartisan, so I'm not going to make arguments pro or con, but I'd be happy to help you figure out where you can access those newspaper endorsements.